Antonio Wolf. It's an idea for a series on probably a limited set of podcasts. I think they'll be very short. Well, relatively short for what we usually do anyways. Introducing Hegelianism in a different way by asking people how it impacts their life, because people are actually very interested in that. Who wouldn't be? It's probably the most important thing out of anything that you ever want to know about anything. How does this actually deal with my life? So, what could be better for a first episode than, having me interviewed? Obviously, I cannot interview myself. That would be boring and awkward. So here, my friend Iapetus will do the honors of asking me the questions, adding in his own questions as they come up, if there are any, and I shall answer. So take it away, Iapetus.
So the first question is, what is Hegelianism in general, according to you?
Hegelianism in general is, to me, most importantly, the methodology which Hegel calls the speculative method. Yes, most people know it by dialectics. It's a misnomer, but it's fine. You could call it dialectics. It doesn't really matter too much. Word names aren't that important. But what is important ultimately is that method that it guarantees certain absolute knowledge. It's not only just objective knowledge. It's better than, most people take subjective knowledge to be They think objective knowledge is good, but this is even better. It's absolute. It's both subjective and objective, unquestionable to a large degree. And I say large because it's not entirely, the whole system is not entirely complete. There are things that I would consider lacking here and there. But on the stuff like on the methodology, I agree with Hegel that he says somewhere in the introduction, the Science of Logic, he says near the end actually, that even though the whole system and the derivations could be done much, much better, there is no other method. You can't really have a philosophy in the end that does not have a unity of content and form, that if you're trying to apply form to things externally, ultimately you're no better than any dogmatist, you're no better than any relativist, and you're just creating fantasies. And ultimately, that's what I would say Hegelianism is, that what Hegel wanted to do, the ideal of it is to, make philosophy into an actual science. That's the ideal that everybody has nowadays. If they could, they would get out of the philosophical realm of, subjective disputes. I have these presuppositions, you have those presuppositions. Get that out of the way and actually go here's the actual objective facts about these certain things, particularly metaphysics, epistemology, more specifically ontology, and everything that comes out of that, ethics. All of that has an objective answer. And I would add on top of that that's also part of what Hegelianism is about, that you don't think that there's objective answers. Is there God? What should I do with my life? Is beauty actually a thing, or do we just make it up? What is the right thing to do? What is the good? Many people today, they don't think that there are such answers, and even people who believe there might be a reality to these things, they don't believe that we can know them. And Hegelianism is a strong answer to that, saying, no, you very much can. And it's incredible how simple it is. It comes off as very complicated, of course, when people first start, but it's a very enticing project, and I think that anybody who's genuinely interested in philosophy at least should be interested that somebody claims to have accomplished this project. Obviously, all the greats always claim that they have accomplished it. So, from the external side, people look at Hegelians and go oh, well, it's just another guy saying that he's done it. But I don't think anybody else has done it better so far.
So this methodology, this thing called speculative thought, do you think it can be taught, or more of a you have to catch it kind of thing?
I'd say it's both. In one way, what it is like the pure abstraction of the process of thinking in a simple self-reference. And so it shows you how like thinking actually operates naturally. Because normally when we think, we are thinking in like very shoddy, haphazard, jumpy ways in which we have these forms which connect things for us, but we're not entirely sure how those things really connect in the details. We naturally do think in the way that Hegel describes in the logic. I mean, the logic is a science of logic. Logic is thinking. So it's the science of thinking. It's not just the science of proper thinking. It's a science of what thinking actually does, even if you don't know how to explicitly do it. You have to do it this way. You just do it better or worse. That's the thing. So, can people be taught this? Well, in a way, nobody's ever taught this, so they do it. But in the way that we have to become conscious to do it well, it can be taught, But unfortunately, it's the thing that seems to be that if you aren't taught to develop these skills at a certain point in your life, well, by the time you're an adult, you're not about to develop them if you didn't already implicitly develop them in your own way. So, where a lot of people would be interested in is like, oh, can I learn this? And that's usually a college student asking this, or university student. Well, hopefully you can. But you and I have had many encounters where there are some people who apparently can't. And maybe it's a cognitive defect on their part, but I've come to actually prefer to believe that somehow people just don't want to believe that this is possible. They're stuck in their own ways, and it's a willful ignorance on their part.
Yeah, I think it's much more of the latter. There are times where I've come across something and I just wasn't ready to accept it. My entire worldview just wasn't ready to accept a certain fact. And funny enough, now that I've studied Hegel, the worldview of worldviews, there's not really any fact that I can't really accept or at least entertain.
Yeah, that's a good characterization. That Hegelianism is also this meta-philosophy of meta-philosophy, a worldview of worldviews. Some people take it that way. That it's a kind of this systematizing of systems, which itself is not a positive system. It's just like this. It's like the negative dialectical critique of other systems, and just showing how they interconnect internally. But yeah, since this shows you the highest meta level, it's absolutely reflexive. It kind of gives you a way to organize pretty much everything. It's very interesting.
What has led you personally to study Hegel, whether it's personal, intellectual, by chance?
Originally, I think that the longest character quality in my life that I've had for as long as I can remember is I just wanted to know the truth, man. So through that you grow up in the regular education system. I grew up in a religious household, and they tell you religion's the truth, but it never squared up with me. I would watch Discovery Channel. I was really interested in astronomy and all that kind of stuff, and astrophysics. And discoveries being made there, and science works. As far as we can tell, right? As far as we are told as we grow up, that the science works, and that this is the proof that these other things that we're told are true. And so that becomes a very alluring thing for someone like myself, in that, well, you want the truth, and you're like, well, the truth has to do with reality. There's an intuition there. That truth is not this abstract thing; it's a very concrete thing. So, yeah, if the people in the church are telling you things, but you don't see anything real, they tell you to pray, they tell you to be good, but you see no results. You see, in fact, all the good people around you suffer. You're like, well, that doesn't work, but science works. So eventually, by the time in high school, I actually started getting into fringe science just because I was very fascinated with physics. So I got into I never got into the mathematics, so I'm not going to claim that I understand the mathematics of general relativity or quantum mechanics or anything like that. But I was very interested in the concepts, and you don't need to know the mathematics of some concepts, although some people say, if you don't know the mathematics, you don't really understand what the concepts are. No, that's not really true, and you can see the way that scientists themselves talk about these things, and the mathematics isn't really relevant directly to some of the claims that they're making about the nature of reality, such as time or space or what that's made of. I've always been this kind of like a broad-minded, like interdisciplinary person, and so I liked to keep up with a lot of different things in ongoing science and engineering discoveries. Nothing detailed, by the way. I just like kept up with like superficial news and like broad-level concepts. But a lot of that stuff I started synthesizing in my own mind. I suppose I had a tendency to be a natural, systematic thinker. But I didn't know I was doing that, in high school. I was just doing that. And a lot of that stuff, I started looking at unorthodox ideas that just popped into my head, like I learned about superfluids once somewhere in like 10th grade, and I thought like, well, wouldn't that be interesting if space itself is a superfluid? And I looked stuff up on that, and like, hey, what do you know? There were some serious hypotheses that we're looking into, testing out whether this was possible to tell. Stuff like that. I had these random epiphanies, like the way we understand time, the way we know time is happening is because of physical changes, motion, and that led me to certain things, which led us to a certain kind of understanding of time as measured by cycles of motion. And then I became fascinated by the issue of claims in relativity that time itself slows down when we notice a clock slowed down, and that was kind of odd to me because it was clear that the concept of clocks physically moving does not directly connect you to this abstract domain called time. That's not an obvious thing. Your fridge slows things down to a certain degree, but we don't think that fridges are time machines of any kind. So that's just one of those things that became an itch in my mind. Anyways, I was when I went to college, I had already become disaffected with my love of standard orthodox physics. Like I had already stepped into the fringe. I wasn't into relativity anymore. I was actually convinced that it was pretty demonstrably false, just not only from an experimental perspective, but from a conceptual perspective. I didn't know that I was doing philosophy or engaging in anything like that. But that's one of the things that I first found out. So I go to college, I think in my second year of college. I had a class in which I just was inspired, and I don't remember exactly why, but I just had this idea, well, I'm going to be like the good, open-minded liberal, and I'm going to look at both sides of everything. And so I decided to look into economics. That was kind of a coin flip of sorts. And then between that, I'm like, well, I'm going to read pro-capitalism, anti-capitalism, Karl Marx and Adam Smith. And flipped the coin, and the coin landed on Karl Marx. So I bought Capital Volume 1, and that blew my mind away. It's the most intense thinking that I had done in my life up to then, and that was the most crystal clear argument that I had ever read. Chapter 1 of Capital Volume 1 blew my mind. It also happened to be that I took my first philosophy class, though it technically wasn't a philosophy class. It was a critical thinking class. I just took it as a random elective. Oh, that was it. That was why. That's what inspired the whole being an open-minded liberal thing. I took a random class as an elective. I just had to slot something in to be a full-time student and get a student aid, federal aid. And that class made me realize there was one point in which everything's fine, okay, here's the basic structures of arguments, here's how you critique, news pieces and articles and whatnot, and figure out what the argument is, whether the argument is valid, and how do you contextualize it to see if it is or isn't sound, if you can even tell such. And there were two things in that class that happened somewhere around the 3/4 of the class being done. There was an essay in which I chose the topic of rights. And I realized that I had no idea what rights were, and I read a lot for like 2 weeks. And I did not go to class for like 2 weeks. It was a bi-weekly class, so I missed 4 class sessions because I was at home obsessed with reading a bunch of articles on rights, and it just bothered me so greatly to realize that everybody uses this word rights, and everybody invokes rights, the right to free speech, the right to privacy, many other rights. And apparently nobody knew what that really was, or like why it should matter. And you take the constructivist view or you take the naturalist view, and whichever one, it ultimately doesn't make full sense of what we're trying to appeal to. So that was a great eye-opener for me about how mundane things are actually unknown, which is crazy. I mean, it feels already crazy that you look into something like advanced physics and whatnot, and come to an understanding that there's some kind of vacuity there, despite the fact that there are these gigabrain people supposedly working in these fields who accept just plain absurdities, in quantum mechanics, particle wave duality is just absurd. But people just state those things as a matter of fact. That was already like a shocking enough, and you're like, okay, but that's kind of these really advanced things in which maybe people don't understand because obviously it's too much to get into, and even once you're into it, you're probably committed to certain things, and you don't have time to really look into like these advanced things. You just take it for granted that somebody else did it. But it didn't strike me at all as natural to make the conclusion that maybe this happens with just everyday things, and finding out that we had nobody has an idea what the hell right is or how these things actually work was mind-blowing to me. It really changed my perspectives on a lot of things. So finding out that I didn't know that, I'm like, well, what else isn't known? Another thing that happened in that class was the last essay I wrote for it was on free will, in which I also likewise came to an understanding that while the free will position didn't make any sense, the determinist position also didn't make any sense. And I could tell that there was something wrong. There was something wrong about the very way in which the question was being posed that biased the answer automatically towards determinism, or at least against free will in general, because the conception was, in the very question, nonsensical, contradictory. Then from that, I did the decision to look into everything for myself in as much as I could. Don't take everything for granted. Look into economics, look into both sides, see who is right, who is wrong, what biases there might be. Flipped on Marx, loved Marx. Stuck with Marx for about 5 years. And then after exhausting Marx, and the main thing I studied with Marx was just capital. And capital is heavy conceptual stuff. I know to this day I'm proud I've never read the Communist Manifesto. Most people get into Marxism because they decide to read that stupid little pamphlet, and I've never read it, even though it's been assigned to me 3 times. Well, it was assigned to me 3 times in college. I never read it. I just bullshitted myself through class presentations and essays, and it was fine enough.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
a polemic work. It's not very necessary. It sounds like there's a satisfaction in knowing the truth, and you might have
yeah,
encountered this, but people are asking, what's the point of knowing the truth? What's the point of walking around knowing the structure of capital, or for having a framework for these conceptual truths? Will it bring the same thing it brings to you to them?
uh, yeah. Like I certainly always had this abstract fascination and desire for truth. I didn't even it wasn't even like connected to anything I particularly wanted. It was just like I want to know the truth. I prefer to know the truth and be miserable than to be happy in a lie. Uh, so through Marx, then you know that Marxists talk a lot about this dialectic stuff, and so in the 5 years that I was really heavy into capital, this constantly came up and constantly came up, and I looked into many people who claim to be explaining this, and they never explained anything. You can read what Lenin says; it doesn't make sense. You can read what Trotsky says; it doesn't make sense. I read Bertolt Ullmann's book, and that didn't seem like a very deep thing or to be really directly relevant to what Marx was doing. And so I just got tired of Marxists. And throughout those years, I would occasionally like peep some random like quotes from Hegel across certain things that I was like looking into besides Marxism, because even though I became very much fascinated with Marxism, uh, like fundamentally I had already also become a skeptic, like due to the scientific stuff that I had gone into. I had become aware of the epistemological problems, and particularly with classical skepticism, and I had become convinced that everything that we have that we call knowledge is really just castles in the sky, and the only thing that really is worth in any of that investigation is, well, who can make a more either practical castle or a more satisfying answer that doesn't have as many holes or gaps or jumps. So even though I liked Marxism, there wasn't some metaphysical truth. I was never a dialectical materialist in that kind of way. But so I was still into these occasionally like I had become like, utterly anti-metaphysical, and so like when I took actual philosophy classes, I took one political philosophy class, and it just made me so angry because we'd be reading all these people. Well, I had already read Marx the year prior, and you're reading Rousseau, you're reading Hobbes, you're reading a few other people, and I was just like, this is just such a waste of time. Like these people are talking about things that never existed, because I was focused on we need to begin with concrete facts and build off of that to make our understanding of the world. And a lot of these people began with these abstract things like the ideal state of nature, assumptions of human nature, and that just didn't cross well with me. So it was a mix of that. I had also like some interest in mysticism. So I would occasionally look into the metaphysical like things, and would see random quotes from Hegel, and it would just scratch an itch that I had in the back of my mind that I wasn't fully aware of. So like what I did read from Hegel, which is these random snippets, were fascinating to me. There seemed to be something deeply true there, but I couldn't tell what. So finally, somewhere around like 2014, I finally decided to read the man himself, skip all the commentators. One, at the time, believe it or not, even in 2014, I just could not find anything that was intelligible. Like, there were not that many ebooks available as freely as they are now. There weren't that many uploaded online, and I didn't have the money or the or the knowledge of who was a good commentator. So everything that I had found online that was like these secondary essays about Hegel didn't explain anything any clearer than just reading Hegel himself. I hadn't read Hegel himself besides the snippets, so I wasn't entirely sure. So secondary didn't work. I read the Phenomenology Spirit, and the preface of the Phenomenology Spirit, highly unintelligible, but there was stuff that did make sense, like his critique of epistemology I completely agreed with. And what fascinated me was his claim that he had a solution, that there would be a solution to this in the end, which is amazing. If you can beat the skeptical problem, you're like world historical uh, in a big way. There's a fulcrum of the entire past in which we couldn't justify knowledge with any certainty ultimately, and then suddenly you can do this, and now from here on you can finally have an actual true science. Science being systematic knowledge. So I read Hegel for the first time in 2014. I only read like the first 4 chapters. I got up to the master slave. Didn't understand probably like 70%, but what I did understand were a few things that solidified in my mind. Okay, there's something here. I would like to know more about it, but I just kind of left it for a while. It wasn't until like 2016 that I found these other people online who were interested in philosophy through a online politics website on a Mongolian image board ripoff. If you know that reference, good for you. And they wanted to read philosophy, tried reading Kant's Prolegomena. Nobody did the reading. We found out the hard way that you can't just go and say, hey, read this 50-page thing, and or it's not even that long. I think the Prolegomena is only about, it depends on the size of the page ultimately, right? I think the PDF I have is like something like maybe 40 pages, but a lot of it you could skip because it was footnotes that didn't seem necessary. One, nobody read it. The 2 people who read it was me and my friend Hyperion. And he read it like the day before, and I read it like 3 hours before the actual meeting. We got together, and there was not much to say, and it was not actually a very interesting work, so it was disappointing because a lot of people go like, well, you read this as a summary of the Critique of Pure Reason, if you just, it helps you understand, and I mean, as a standalone piece, it's quite horrible in my opinion. But anyways, after that, we had another option, and I suggested, because I had been reading around, I found James Krine's essays commenting on Hegel, in which they were far more intelligible than other things I had found before, but still quite unintelligible for somebody who's just got like a light philosophy background. There's like 3 101 classes. But Krine's convinced me of one thing. He constantly brought up this whole presuppositionalist thing, and I thought to myself, well, if this is true, then I should be able to read this book, The Science of Logic, without all of this massive historical background knowledge about other philosophers. So I took that seriously, and I suggested to the group, well, let's just read through The Science of Logic and let's see if we can make sense of it. So we decided not to do read a whole chapter and then get together and discuss, because that never works, as far as I experience anyways. So we just read it aloud in a voice chat, and I was astounded. From the very first chapter, I was astounded that, though I wasn't entirely 100% certain about my interpretation, I had a textually based interpretation which I could easily go and read out of the text, even though a lot of it was an external projection of sorts, but it worked. And for somebody who has no background, that's kind of impressive. Maybe not for others, but it's impressive to oneself that something like that is possible. And I got it.
Can you speak a little bit to the importance of first-hand exposure and actually reading firsthand the words on the page, thinking through the content?
Yeah. In the it's like right now by Hegel gives the example of swimming. To learn to swim, having the abstract theory of how to swim is no good. You'll only swim by actually getting in the water, moving your muscles, feeling out the buoyancy and how your stroke goes and whatnot. That's the only way to learn to swim. You cannot learn to swim in theory. Likewise, you cannot learn to think in theory. You actually have to think. And what Hegel offers is not a theory of thought. What he offers is direct thought exercises. Here's an object. Now think through its meaning. And it seems that a lot of people have problems with this. but most people that I encounter that have problems with these are people who have been through prior philosophical education, in which, strangely, this has not been their experience. They have experienced reading about thoughts and reading others' pre-digested thoughts about deep thoughts, and not actually working through the thoughts themselves. And the fact that Hegelian secondary literature is itself difficult is expressive of that fact that Hegel's genuinely thinking about something that needs to be thought, that you can't not think it and get it. You can't be told about it. It's pointless. Not only that, like, it's like math. To get philosophical thinking, you need to work it out. You need to do the math exercises to get it burned into your brain so that it becomes, a second-hand nature to you to just be able to do a calculation. Likewise, in order to think in general, you need to do a consistent repetition of particular thoughts, in which you're not presupposing what it is that is to be thought, but you're the one who's doing the thinking. And the only thing that makes Hegel difficult ultimately is that he gives you nothing to hold on to at the very beginning, but that's exactly the only thing that could possibly ever force you to really think. Everyone else gives you something to hold on to that's familiar. Hegel does not. He doesn't even begin with definitions in any normal way. He doesn't proceed in an analytical fashion, which is here's a definition, here's that in a postulate, and we're going to work with this, and then in this given thing we start seeing how things formally fit or don't fit with this given thing. But with Hegel, you have to you have to understand the basic language, not his language, basic language, which is kind of I feel I have to say this because I found out that apparently a lot of people lack the capacity or the willingness to examine or not even examine, but just to take basic language as it is. They think that when you're reading philosophy, the philosopher's trying to trick you or something. Well, Hegel's not trying to trick you, but it takes a certain acceptance of everyday meaning, that there's a fact of meaning already. Nobody teaches you this. You don't need to pre-think this. If he says being is indeterminate, and somebody asks, well, what do you mean by is? Well, you just got to take it as a regular way. Later on, you'll find out what this has to do exactly with what the beginning is. But you have to take that for granted. You can't be too skeptical of the given functions of your capacity to understand that you already have. But that's the main thing. Hegel ultimately has to be read directly. You can't really read about him, and any good philosopher works this way. Ultimately, you may read secondary literature which pre-digests certain things, but I guarantee you, for example, if you read something about Plato, if you read, it might help you get a grasp of what's going on. But if you go ahead and read Plato yourself, even after getting that foundation in secondary literature, you will be able to find out things that you were not told by the commentators that you read. Because there are deeper things in those thoughts than what anybody can actually just tell you. So the act of thinking is the one that connects and reveals these things to you. And that's also part of the difficulty that people have, that people are not taught to read. And this is very strange, because I do think this is possible to teach, but it has to be done early on. Perhaps somewhere around 6th grade, middle school. They need to show you that to pay attention to the way language works, to the way words are being used, how words refer to other words. In a conceptual fashion rather than an explicit linguistic, grammatical fashion, so that people understand that when you're reading a text to be thought through, you really need to be paying attention to statements of identity. If, in one paragraph they say, look, apples are green, in an abstract sense. There's an identity between apple and greenness, and the next time they mention greenness, greenness is squareness or something like that. You ought to be able to connect apples to greens to squareness, and if there's an identity state of one and there's an identity state of the second, then there must be an identity. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. You must be able to piece that together and pay attention to that and keep it in mind, because otherwise, in the grand tradition of like the top level thinkers, you can't make sense of anything. That's how I could make sense of Hegel. That I somehow I intuitively came to this skill. I don't know why, but when I decided that you have to read presuppositionlessly, it suddenly made sense that I need to keep track of everything that he's saying, and I need to take it very literally. And so when I read the phenomenology, there's in the preface, there's a bunch of these weird identities that he claims. And if you don't keep track of them, you just you don't understand what many things mean. But if you do keep track of them, and I have an essay, a blog post on this, and as well as a video, it is actually extremely intelligible what he means by weird things like substance is subject or the I is becoming or something like that. It becomes intelligible by these other connections of things that are not entirely foreign to you, but not exactly what you normally think, but you're not entirely lost. That is a whole skill of itself that you can only gain by primary reading and working at it. Actually, funny enough, somebody asked me that question recently in a DM, and that's what I told them. That you need to practice keeping track of things.
Would you say that this is one of the biggest bottlenecks for understanding Hegel? And if not, what would be one of the most difficult moments of your study in Hegel, and how would you push through it, or how would you tell somebody how to push through it?
The two bottlenecks for Hegel is the inability to just accept what he says, like that you want to argue with him, but if you are testing out his hypothesis, you need to stop arguing from your perspective against him. If his hypothesis is, look, there can be presuppositions philosophy, we can do it, we're going to do it, and we're going to start. You cannot then go like, wait, but how do we know that there is presuppositional philosophy? How do you know that we do begin here, or we shouldn't begin over there? You are then not in the experiment anymore. The point is that you need to do the experiment. In science, when you replicate an experiment, you need to do exactly what the original experiment was. You cannot add innovations here and there. And if something goes wrong, you say, oh, well, like the experiment failed. They reported something wrong. I've disproven the results that they got. Well, they'll go and check what you did, and they're like, well, but you didn't do what we told you to do, what we did. So you didn't actually check what we did. You did something else, and then you're claiming that this has something to do with us. Well, it doesn't. Likewise, you can't go and test the hypothesis of Hegel's philosophy by making these external preliminary demands of something that the philosophy has already told you that you're not supposed to do. So that's the first barrier. The second barrier is, that incapacity of people to keep track of things and notice connections. And it is a more linguistic kind of intelligence where you need to be aware of the cleverness of language. And Hegel does a lot of wordplay. All good philosophy has wordplay in it. It's inescapable, and it's highly useful and compact to communicate once you know how to do it and you know how to read it. What was the most difficult moment trying to read Hegel for me? The transition of becoming to existence was hell. That was the moment in which the week that I read that first chapter the first time and the second chapter, I spent 60 hours straight. I have these diagrams that you've seen. They're on the Empyrean Trail on the banner, and they're also were on the banner on my Twitter, and they're on my thing. The being to becoming diagram, the existence diagrams. That being to becoming to existence thing. I woke up in that week. I woke up and it was 12 solid hours of. I read it. I'm like, okay, I think I got it. I would do these diagrams for like 12 hours, try to make it as perfect as I could, and write it down in a way that makes sense to me. Talk to a bunch of other people on like Discord at the time, and go like, okay, hear me out. Let me try to explain this to you. And they're like, oh, okay, I think it makes sense. Then I would like go to sleep, exhausted afterwards. At the end of the day, I would wake up the next morning and I'd look back again. I'm like, no, this doesn't make any sense. I would read the text again, and I'm like, no, what I was saying does not match what the text is saying. So I had to rethink it again. So I did that for a whole week straight, until it finally clicked for me, like what that movement was. And after that, it wasn't smooth sailing, but I never again had that level of difficulty. The only thing that came close was the movement of determinacy to something, because of the linchpin of negation in between. Like the movement to reality negation is really it. I think I spent like 2 days on that completely, where I likewise just couldn't get what the hell was going on. And then I looked at a different translation from Miller, because I was using the Cambridge translation. And the way Miller phrased it made it so much clearer, because in the Cambridge translation, like the reason I couldn't get it is that there was something really obtuse about the way he phrased it, and it was not clear what a certain word referenced. In the Miller translation, it was much clearer. So with the Miller thing, I can like, okay, now I get it. And finally I could move on. After that, I've never had that level of difficulty. Like I think the last time I had any difficulty was getting back into chapter 3 when I worked on it maybe 4 months ago, 5 months ago, maybe, or what is it? Almost half a year ago, actually. And that took me a few hours for me to like situate my mind back into the groove of what was going on, and like catch up like where the structures were exactly interlocking. And what confused me there was the relationship of the beginning of the being for itself and being for one, because it is such a weird abstract beginning that you can just like read that. There's a really easy interpretation that works. It's functional and it follows the rhythm of what you're normally doing. But if you look more closely at it, that little transition is actually much more difficult than you would imagine. Back when I taught work years ago, reading that, we were going over it once, and he was stumped, and he's like, "Why are you like obsessing about like this like little like sentence over here? Like, you know, like is it like, you know, can't you just move on?" I'm like, "No, man. Like these kinds of things, you need to get like the movement." Mm-hmm. Not exactly right, but you need to get it clear for yourself what's happening, because otherwise things later on, there are things that you will not realize that you should have realized, and there are things that you will believe that are wrong, and you're carrying over an error, which is not the worst thing in the world. It's fine if you do that, but I myself, like I have treated my study of this stuff in a way that like I am building it up exactly as one should if it is all presuppositionless. You can't gloss over things. You're building up a skyscraper. You can't skip any floors. It's not going to work. So you need to build foundation layer by layer. Otherwise, you know, what's the point?
Yeah, absolutely. If there's a lesson here, one of them can be persistence is the name of the game. There's actually a very similar phenomenon in music, where musicians, when they struggle with a difficult piece, you know, they play it all day long, and it just doesn't seem to work out. They go to sleep, and then they come back to it later, and it magically works itself out, whether that's cross-referencing with what the musical notes are saying, doing a check with your internal hearing, and then seeing if that makes sense. It really just getting the holistic view of it. That's really the first step to comprehension. You don't need to completely master it right then and there, but not going, continuing until you get that piece, that part down. That's really important.
Actually, to add another thing, this is a psychological or psychoanalytic outlook on what led me to Hegel. It wasn't something I consciously did, but I've reflected on it many years later. There's a quote from Fichte. I don't have it on hand, but it's a beautiful one in which it's in the introduction. I think the second or the first introduction to Wissenschaftler, the science of knowledge, from 1782 or whatever, or 1784. And he mentions that the kind of philosophy that a man has depends entirely on the character of the man. The philosophy expresses, the deep convictions of a person, or what drives them psychologically in a way. A lot of people would interpret this as, then philosophy is what Nietzsche says, it's just biography. It's a hidden biography. And it's just a subjective thing. No. Fichte's intent there is not to say, philosophy is subjective, if you're a certain way, well, you just have these certain beliefs. No, what he's saying is there is objectively a certain way that you are. Some people, they're just wrong. Not wrong only cognitively, they're wrong in many other ways, like psychologically. So an ontological fact about them leads to a choice of a philosophical expression of an understanding of the world, which is itself wrong. Because Fichte was obviously an idealist, and he believed idealism was true. He wasn't putting the materialist and the idealist on the same level here. Well, reflecting on that, I think that's true. It's inescapable that your psychological and historical makeup as a feeling person and as having a certain a social experience and reflective experience leads you to certain views. I think that part of what leads somebody to say something like German idealism is that there is a innately strong desire for a unity of some kind, whether it be some kind of intuited unity, a psychological one, or a mental, rational unity. I come from a background in which my family is highly dysfunctional. I lived in a highly chaotic and painful childhood. And so does it make sense that somebody like that would then have this strong hunger for this unity, a unity that's the strongest that you can get? Somebody who's trying to keep things together in a world in which their experience is that everything is falling apart. And I think that does make sense. That's part of why someone like me would gravitate towards this kind of thing. And it's also why I think most of the Hegelians that you find seem to have backgrounds that are troubled in many ways. Not all of them, but it seems to be people like myself would be far more likely, not just because of the background, it's because there's my personal character. Somehow I am the kind of person who strives to maintain that unity, whereas there's other people who they just give up on the unity and they become cynical and bitter and whatnot. And you end up more like a Nietzsche than a Hegel.
Yeah, very interesting. I think that serves as a great segue into the nitty-gritty of how Hegel works. So, what do you say to those that say Hegelianism might be the ultimate closed, dogmatic, uncreative box? You have the beginning of a system with the science of logic, but what is this logic? How do we get from this metaphysical reality that's supposedly objective to the real world, to the world I see outside in front of me?
Yeah, it's a very good question. There's two ways I understand that question. There's the one you asked, but I'll answer that second. I'll answer the first one that I understand. As far as the view of the system as closed, it is and it isn't, and as with all things Hegelian, it's a contradiction. It's long to explain. I'm not going to explain it, but I'm just saying it. There is, just like there's a right way to do the right things, there's also a right way to do wrong things, and there's a wrong way to do the right things as well as the wrong things. Hegelianism is closed in that, like, the methodology and certain conclusions, and by certain I mean some, are not stock, lock, and barrel solid, guaranteed targets that we've hit or Hegel has hit. So just like, compared to, there's a certain way, there are certain strictures, right? Like in engineering. If you're engineering a combustion engine, there's a minimal set of just inescapable designs that you have to use. You can't not use them. It's the kind of thing that you're working with. But beyond that, the ways in which you may add, certain modifications, bells and whistles, that's up to you and what other things that you would have that you want that to do. If you have a regular car, you have certain things. If you have a race car, you have other things. If you want to have a hauling truck, you have other things. Nonetheless, they're all combustion engines. They all have like the same basic principles, and those principles are not going to change. Hegel's system is a system which tells you, look, there is ultimately only one way to do philosophy. It's Hegel's philosophy, like his method. It also tells you, well, there's an inescapability between methodology and consequences, or the products of that methodology. So that if you buy Hegel's method, you cannot do what a lot of Marxists claim, that, like, oh, we can take the method in it, but we can have different conclusions. No, according to Hegel, you can't. And if you understand what the method does, it's true, you can't. But within that, there's a lot of openness in that you don't have to be doing Hegel's project, Like, you can transpose Hegel's methodology and, say, use Indian philosophical categories or Chinese philosophical categories. And it is very possible. You can take this methodology and take any categories that you want, Deleuzian, Heideggerian, Husserlian, Russellian, Bertrand Russell and whatnot, analytic stuff. You can run this method on anything of that sort. If you do not care to be doing exactly what Hegel's doing, you can still do very interesting things. It's not the worst thing in the world. I wouldn't even say that you're wasting your time. Some people just have a certain kind of like taste and for a certain kind of presentation. What you can't get that's going to be different is some fundamental things like, can you think about cause and effect differently from Hegel? Ultimately, no. It's a pretty solid thing. Can you think about nature differently than Hegel? I would dare say, yes, you can. There's a lot of things in which, like, you have a lot of leeway to change things up, mainly because those things, for example, they're not settled even by Hegel's own admission. We still don't know we still learn things about nature. We still find things out. We still have to think about those things, and we have to think about them fresh and anew. We can't always think within, what does Hegel say about this? Well, maybe Hegel says nothing, or maybe what Hegel says is kind of irrelevant to what you're doing, what you're trying to figure out. Maybe, like, there's not clear what you're looking at. Where does it fit? Is it a living thing? Is it a chemical thing? Is it a physical thing? Is it something else? That's up to us to do, and we can develop things in many ways. So while it's also the case that truth itself is exclusive, if something is true, ultimately it can't be false. So it excludes falsehood in the typical sense. There's Hegel's sense of falsehood as incompleteness, which is included, but the typical sense of falsehood is that which is just abstractly against. It's a negation of what is true. Those two things are mutually exclusive. If you have one, you can't have the other. So if you're going to do philosophy as according to what Hegel's doing, you can't be doing something Nietzschean, for example. It's not going to work. But you can do certain things like, well, let's rethink. Does the category that he calls space, does that actually fit what we mean by space these days? Are we even talking about the same thing? Have we changed up the word? Do we refer to the same thing anymore? It could be, it could not be. You could have questions of gender that way. You could have questions of, rights of certain kinds. A lot of stuff is still open. not only that, Hegelianism is actually pretty inclusive as well. Like, quite frankly, taking myself at least, you know me, and like if anybody watches my channel, look up at the many things that I've looked into. I'm actually a pretty like open-minded person in which I like to see the positive in other things. You know, many people go like, "Oh, well, you know, it's Hegelianism is Eurocentric and whatnot," and these people have never touched a book on Indian philosophy in their life. They have never learned anything of Chinese philosophy. They just kind of like, you know, yap about how wonderful these other alternate views are, but they don't actually know what these alternate views are, and they don't know whether they're like, you know, decent or bad or, you know, great. Hegelianism has made me appreciate far more other people's thinking that I didn't appreciate before, because now I can understand why these people necessarily thought the way that they did. And that for their times and at the place where they were intellectually, it makes perfectly good sense. And that we can look at that and go like, wow, that was really great. Isn't that amazing? While at the same time not falling into the relativistic trap of thinking that these things are equal. So another like aspect of like that, I don't consider it ultimately a dogmatic or uncreative box. Is, I mean, fuck. Hegel's made me far more open-minded, far more accepting of other views. Like, I don't really go around like trying to force Hegelian views on anybody. It's not that kind of thing that you can do with philosophy anyways. But I also appreciate them, and I see their beauty in their use. Like, you know, somebody asked me, look, you know, I'm interested in philosophy, I want to know the truth. This Hegel stuff it seems a bit too abstract, I don't get it. You know, I'm not going to go like, oh, well, you know, you're too stupid or whatnot. If maybe philosophy's not for you. No. Like, what I'll tell them is, you know, maybe you should go look into these Neo-Confucians, because I think that what they've got is really good. You know, they got something really interesting and solid going on. It's maybe much more intuitive than what Hegel is doing, and to the extent that it's true, and a lot of it is very true. That is better, way infinitely better than what you would get out of typical analytic or even continental philosophy.
This is a bit of a side tangent, but do you find yourself interpreting social or political events differently because of Hegel?
Yes. It has heavily impacted my political outlook. You know, I came from a Marxist background. I was a anarcho-communist, I would say. Hegel has made the world that we live in make sense in a way in which I understand why it necessarily had to come about in a way that... I mean, Marx also says, look, this had to happen. But he doesn't have any decent explanation. Historical materialism ultimately isn't a very deep theory of anything. And what Hegel explains about it is that there is not just an intellectual development, not just an economic development of, you know, material production and who gets this and what and where. There's also this development of a spiritual understanding about what it is to be a human being, such that when you understand that we are embodied individuals, that there is a limitation of certain things in this world, no matter what we want to say, and that we have certain proclivities of identification with certain places, things, stuff like property is a necessity. It's not just an option. So that the whole system of property rights makes sense. You know, it doesn't mean that like the way that we have it is completely rational. It's not. You know, with IP laws and whatnot, everybody knows that like they're ridiculous. That, you know, if things were rational, they wouldn't be that way. But nonetheless, that there would be such a thing as IP law, that there would be rights over such things, does make sense given our past trajectory in our current moment. And it also does make sense that, you know, according to someone like Marx, there will be a time in which certain things just won't make sense as like falling under these things, because we just won't have the same material need for them anymore, and we won't have the same like working relationship to them. I would say that Hegel has made me fall into, well, a kind of a perpendicular axis to the regular left-right spectrum. Uh, you know, in a way, it's centrist, but it's a transcendental centrism in which, rather than being a little bit of A and a little bit of B, I get all of A and I get all of B, and they happen to be extremes or opposite, but they're required together and they have to be there. And the question is not how can I get half of A and half of B. No, we need to get all of A and all of B, and we just need to put them in the right place. When it comes to say family issues, I'll go ahead and say that's controversial. The right is in the right, meaning they have the true view of this for the wrong reasons, but they have a true view of the family, whereas the left is just wrong. So, if we're going to be a centrist, we can't really be like, well, we're going to have like a half of the theory of family from the right and a half of the theory of non-family from the left. No, we need the whole theory of the family from the right. But guess what? Like the theory of the dignity of labor, the value of, social programs, the necessity of state welfare to step into the market. That aspect of the left is completely true. And on the right, they're completely wrong. And so the question is, which things on the left and which things on the right are actually true? And then we bring those things together. It's not like, let's take the same issue and take half and half,
So it sounds like there's a relationship between knowledge, self-consciousness, and freedom.
Yeah.
What do you think is the significance of Hegel with reference to that relationship? How does he compare to people before and even people currently?
He relates in a way that he synthesizes pretty much all the prior traditions. Shows that the reason they arose is because there was something true about them, but also the reason they have failed is precisely because they're one-sided. They're not clear on what aspect of truth they have, and they're mistaken about being right on certain things in which they are actually wrong. Like the whole minimalist state craft of modern liberalism and classical liberalism. Let the market do most of it. Don't regulate it. Don't touch it. Don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. Well, rationally, it could be shown easily they were wrong, but also empirically they've been shown to be wrong. Hegel goes ahead and just gives you the rational explanation as why they were wrong, but also that you don't go to the extreme other way like Marxists do and say markets are chaotic and therefore markets are bad and we need to get rid of all markets. Everything needs to be planned production. We need to have a planned economy, and that kind of controlled rationing. Because the economy is already a system of rationing anyways, and so a lot of the right wing go oh no, rationing is bad. Well, no, you're already rationing. You're just rationing in a different way. But the question is, what can you do about that rationing? And well, depending on these presuppositions that people have, in which Hegel does take these two sides. We need to have the free market for certain things, but not everything is part of the free market. There's certain things that just shouldn't be. Like education. Should education be up to the highest bidder? Should it be controlled by people whose interest is money? No.
Right. Has Hegel's view of contradiction helped you deal with conflict or uncertainty in your life, and can it help others to conceptualize the problem?
Yeah. I think that understanding contradiction in Hegel's sense lets you see that people can be right in many ways that they don't understand, and that them being right may require that you take a look at what you're doing and how that contextualizes with what they're doing. That maybe you can actually have alliances with certain people, because like we live in a time in which like if you're not from my party, you're my enemy, even though like we have issues in which we actually agree, and there are also complementary issues. If somebody's arguing between a monist and a pluralist, the Hegelian has no problem stepping in and says, hey, actually you're both right, from your like it's not just like you're partially right. No, usually these two sides, if they're being fundamental, they're making completely like true criticisms of each other, and they're bolstering themselves with a true set of conceptual understandings. What Hegelianism does practically there is, at least in rational disputes, is to show like, well, no, like you're right about this, they're right about that, and the difference is you're mistaken about the context in which your side of the truth holds, and the context in which their side of the truth holds. Likewise, in the politics example, I said like, I'm a kind of transcendental centrist in which I take in both sides of the truth. This reduced a lot of the animosity that I used to have politically towards people that I normally, they're on the right, I'm on the left, or I'm on the left, or I'm on the right, they're on the left, kind of thing, in which it helps not reduce people into abstractions. It helps to see that they're complementary sides, that just because they may be wrong in a whole set of other things, in this one issue they're right, and you ought to tell them. A lot of people don't want to admit that their enemies have anything true to say, because they think that legitimizes the whole thing of what the enemy is saying, which is itself irrational, and in a quite literal sense. Irrationality is the incapacity to bring parts together under a whole. If you cannot make these graceful gestures to the people who you disagree with on so much, but when they say something right and they have it right, and just because they're on the other camp, you're not willing to admit it. When you actually are willing to admit it, that's when you can start having a healing of that rift, and start to be rational in a proper sense. Of course, it takes two to tango, and one should expect that both sides need to do this, because if only one side gives, and there are political problems down the line, and the imbalance of power and whatnot. But nonetheless, you have to do that. And then likewise, with conflicts in one's life, although those are far more concrete, and I would not qualify them as contradictions. It's very rare that some kind of interpersonal conflict comes down to some kind of reducible dialectical contradiction. It still bolsters the common sense motto that you ought to take a look at not only what other people do, but what you do, and see how you are part of problems just as they are part of problems. And likewise, you would hope that they do the same. That if you can do that, usually you can diffuse a lot of problems.
Yeah, very, very insightful. You talked a bit about how Hegel influences how you interpret human relationships, and this is in the sphere of what he would call objective spirit. Love, hate, friendship, enemy, politics, family, friendship. I might have said that already. But how does Hegel articulate what one's relationship to the absolute should be? Things like art, things like religion. What does he prescribe that we do with this absolute? And what is the absolute? This totality, unity, the whole. Is it something we seek, experience, contemplate? Yeah.
All of those. The absolute's all-encompassing. It's the big one. It's God, as Hegel would call it. It's hard to talk about that, because one would have to get a grounding in the methodology, in the science of logic, to have on the immediate proof that there is a basic structure to this that you can verify for yourself. And once you verified it and you look back and you're like, okay, this is what I did, and I see how I traversed this path, like a Mobius strip. A Mobius strip is a contradictory thing. It's a one-sided flat object. Technically it only has one side, and yet at the same time, you look at it and you're like, but it has two sides. How can that be? And nonetheless, if you lived on that Mobius strip and you were walking across, from one side to the other, you would only, from that perspective of walking, see yourself only ever walking on one side. You would never feel yourself transition to the other side even after you did. But you could see it afterwards from looking back at the whole thing, like the way it looks in 3D. You'd realize, oh, I've actually gone to the other side, and yet it's all one side. The experience of doing that intellectually gives you the proof that the weirdness of the contradictoriness of the absolute is just a fact. It's a fact that you can see for yourself, that it does happen and that it's inescapable, that it must happen. There is no way to avoid it, and so you cannot stand there and go like, oh, well, I guess reality doesn't make sense. Just like when you walk to the Mobius strip, your walking has no problem. Like walking from one side to the other, from your perspective, is just one continuous walk. There is no problem. At no point did you do some, different little jig in which you weren't walking while somehow still moving. You just kept walking. Likewise with these abstract concepts of metaphysics, you just think through them and you're going to end up on the other side whether you like it or not. And the only thing is to acknowledge, okay, I made it to the other side. I know what I did, so I know how I did it. And the only thing there afterwards is just to recognize that, accept it, and say, okay, this is just the result. It looks weird from the end, but when I was doing it, it was completely fine. Only then can you then jump to the absolute and start looking at it, and you're like, okay, so ultimately the unity of all things is going to be this weird contradiction, which is moving and doesn't move in its movement. We can call it God, we can call it whatever. Ultimately, everything comes together in that kind of form. Seeing that development, that you start in one way, in one place, and just by being there, you're automatically moved to the next place. With being in nothing, the moment you start, you already stopped. You're already at the end of the journey. You went from being to nothing. You didn't do anything, but that's exactly what it is. That gives you the sense of the developing movement of reality, such that if reality is the absolute, and clearly we're in movement, we're in motion, we're changing cognitively and physically, temporally, emotionally. So we are already in a path of development. Everything is. The universe has come to be, or if you don't want to say the universe has come to be, you would say at least like the things in the universe somehow have come to be. Call it energy, call it whatever, being configured, but nonetheless, every individual thing has a history in which they weren't, and a history in which they came, and a history in which they won't be in the future. Or a future where they won't be. From that, we can see that there's some kind of a build-up in the world. And this build-up is both right now as a layer of reality leads you up to God, and as a future thing seems to be developing towards something greater. You can think about post-humanism and whatnot of different kinds, in which we know for a fact, like we're not going to remain the kind of beings that we are. We're going to mess with our biology. We're going to augment ourselves, and so even the human being, as the kind of being that it is already in motion to go from a purely intellectual self-changing that we have had up to now to now a physical self-development that we're going to consciously do. What the role God plays in that is that God plays the aspect of the planner and creator of reality. This is a hard sell, I know. There's a whole separate argument to convince one of that. But having the idea of God as the absolute idea, this absolute process of reality itself, I don't know, for somebody who actually values truth, it seems to me that a consequence of that is that you're in awe of this, and that there's a level of veneration towards that. Because this is not some dead object. And even when it's a dead object, nonetheless, people are still in awe, and they can't help venerate, something like the Neo-Confucians. They don't believe that God is a person. But the Tao is still something that like they're utterly in awe of, and they can't help but venerate it as if it were a person. It does things. They don't pray to it or anything, but like they follow it willingly. Because it's the perfect model of the reality itself, the archetype. So that also leads to like some of the greatest art. Some of the greatest art is ultimately religious art. But also that includes everything from the layers of subjective personal art to objective art about society to theological stuff. It leads people to philosophy. Philosophy is ultimately the attempt to understand God by pure reason. And then, religions come about, and religions where people found most of their direct personal relationship to the absolute itself. That you don't have to just wait for the future in which, somehow maybe we become godlike beings of some kind, who knows. But that the absolute is here and now in some way, actively working in and through you and relating to you in a process that's bringing about a greater freedom.
So Hegel's system is all-encompassing. He's known as one of the world's last great system builders. Are there any areas where he could have been wrong? And can he be wrong? Did he get anything wrong as you understand it? Are there any limitations, etc., etc.?
Yeah. Hegel can definitely be wrong. Outside of the logic, I think that everything's open to some kind of significant revision or addition. Like the philosophy of nature, for example, I think is highly, highly incomplete. It's not his fault. It's just the fact that we as humans don't know very much about nature, regardless of what you want to believe and what scientists want to profess these days. If you keep up with anything in scientific news, you will find out that there are shocking discoveries made a lot of many, many times every single year, actually. The things that break all the theories that we have, things that we say shouldn't exist, but they do. Like, what is it? One of the most the last one that I remember was significant was the whole star formation near Sagittarius A. That this goes against everything that we know about the theories of gravity, taking into account the tidal forces of the so-called black hole at the center of the Milky Way. And nonetheless, we see star formation. That should not be possible. We've seen a star that supernova twice, which should not be possible. We see things that violate the whole black matter models that we have, which should not be possible. We see many things in quantum mechanics that should not be possible according to all the things that we know. And those are the things that are reported. There's many other things in which you don't hear on any popular news sites or those kinds of pages, and you only find out through these other fringe sites. And so, with nature, that is a huge open box in which not only can Hegel be wrong, for the vast majority of it, he probably has to be wrong, just because we didn't have the experience of the objects which we do now that we can point to, so that we can begin to conceptualize them. In the philosophy of spirit, for example, I think Hegel has many gaps in the philosophy of right. He acknowledged that. He acknowledged that there was a gap between the system of needs and whatnot. I think that whole thing can be reconceptualized more thoroughly now. People like Richard Dean Winfield have done a reconceptualization of their own. Westphal have done reconceptualization of their own. In Absolute Spirit is the one in which I think that I have the most grievance with, actually. Because I think he dropped the ball, and I think I know why he chose to drop the ball there. For any of you who watched many of the videos that I just do on my walk and talks, like I don't keep it secret. I believe in a higher spiritual world called dimensions or whatever you want. It is supernatural in a quite literal sense, not only in that it's above our current nature. It itself has its own level of nature, expansion and time that works seemingly differently, according to many near-death experiences and mystical experiences that people report. But the way things work there makes sense as what's something that Kant calls intellectual intuition, which is, at this higher level of reality, beings think things, and their thinking is the things themselves. These beings think fire, there is fire. They think a ball, there is a ball. They don't have a representation of the thing, their thinking is the thing. In absolute spirit, that should be there. And it's striking to me that Hegel limits it to representational levels. Now, art is representational. It's just the representational way in which we understand and come to cognize the absolute as embodied in a certain way. But it's mediated through our will and mediated through our conceptual faculties as well. It's not a direct thing. Likewise, in religion, we get away from the sensuous aspect of things, and now you get into the representation of God. They're not physically here, but God is still a personal being. They have a son, it's a father, blah blah blah, or they're Vishnu, they got 6 arms, whatnot. Those things for Hegel still remain, and it's the way that we subjectively or objectively, sorry, maybe that wasn't unintelligible, subjectively are objectively coming to terms with the unity of what we understand the absolute has to be. What I'm talking about is that there should have been a step either after that or before that, I'm not entirely sure, where he had to talk about an absolute spirit which quite literally has what you would call, supernatural magical powers, in which there has to be such a thing. It's not a question of maybe, or, Hegel didn't think it was needed. No, it's needed. That's what God is there for. But Hegel just takes it, only says, God is the only one that has this, and the world is this. The world is God's thinking. Well, there is a spiritual world in which I believe there's angels, demons, blah, blah, blah. Other things, maybe. And I view that as, those beings are doing things. It's not told in most, at least in Western religion, Christianity, Islam or Judaism, you're not told what these beings are actually doing. We know the angels are there, but they're doing something. And it doesn't seem entirely clear that all they're doing is just kind of watching you go about your day. There's more than just guardian angels. So due to my interest in the esoteric, mystical experiences, I do think that there has to be an account. And the reason Hegel didn't make such an account is, one, he wasn't interested in just so stories, which he did believe those were, even though he was fascinated by those things. Since it's not some regular experience that anybody has, and one that he couldn't check himself, you wouldn't want to write a philosophical treatise about something that you don't know about. So why would you even put it in? But there are the implications there that, for example, he talks about national spirits in the philosophy of world history. And in the philosophy of right, talks about the state as its own kind of ontological entity and subject. But that this subjectivity is mediated through the existence of individual human wills, which is true. I do believe that. But he doesn't think about these beings as having a meta self-consciousness above our self-consciousness of their consciousness of their own. It would be akin to thinking of the human being as somehow our will and thinking only being presented on the level of the individual collective of the cells that make up our body, but that we wouldn't think about the independent mind as such over the whole thing, considering the whole thing from its own perspective. at its own level. So I think Hegel's definitely wrong about that.
Wow, that last response leaves us on a very open note, not just on the possibility of expanding Hegel's project, but for the reality we experience in the day-to-day. Nature, spirit, what have you. So given this, what are your suggestions for someone starting with Hegel, for making the study of Hegel's philosophy easier? Should it be easier? What some primary and secondary literature methods to help practice speculative thinking, note-taking, etc., and so on and so forth?
One, I always suggest start with the science of logic. It is the easiest. It is presuppositionless. I know people don't want to believe it. Every few days we get somebody on the server going like, I don't quite buy this presuppositionless thing. I'm like, just do it. They're so worried about the presuppositionless thing being true or not that they're just not willing to do the experiment and see if it is or it isn't. But just do it. Try it. It's good to exercise your own mind and have some trust in your own judgment that things do or do not make sense. If you struggle with it a little bit, even if you don't get it ultimately, it is a thinking exercise which is itself good for you. Second is find if you struggle with it a bit, and by a bit I mean give it a week. Read the first chapter, think about it as you're reading it, reread it. After you read it a few times and you just blank, you don't see how you can go from here to there. Secondary literature that you can look at is first me. I've got my resources. I'm not going to pretend. I'm not going to suggest it. I wrote them because I didn't like what other people wrote. I didn't think that it was that helpful. But there are other people who I do think are helpful, but I don't think that they're as helpful as me. But some people like their framing better than my framing, so that also matters. You can read Holgate. You can read Richard Dean Winfield. You can read Alan White's stuff. I think they're all decent. They're all what I would call generally orthodox readers, metaphysical Hegelians, whatever that means to you. As far as study methods go, struggle at first. As you're struggling, try to summarize the argument in your own words. And now understand that this doesn't mean I was reading Being, and when I read Being, I think of a blank white space, whatever. Don't do that. That's what Hegel calls external reflection. You're projecting things that aren't there. Being and nothing are just immediate. They're not visual. They're not spatial temporal. They don't have any background. They're quite literally just what they are. If there are ways for you to rephrase this, like say presence or absence, then go ahead and do that and say, if by being we mean presence, and I take that word and I take that analogy, which it is an analogy, and I try to look at, if this is just pure presence with no distinctions, well, what is present, right? If I remove myself as a distinct thing from that presence, I can't even say, well, presence is present to me because I'm not there. Presence is presence to what? Without a distinction, there's nothing present in presence, and there's nothing to which presence is present. So what you have is the absence of presence. And likewise, when you look at the absence of presence, you're like, well, at least the absence of present is itself present. It's there. Stuff like that you can do and you should do. You should find some concrete way of something that you are comfortable with understanding to some degree, and transpose it as a frame upon what's happening, because it will help you. But you need to think about it. And it is something that I do think that you should do. Put it in your own words. Because if you can't put things in your own words, you don't really understand it. And a lot of people go like, oh, this is the stupid thing that people say about the quote from Einstein. If you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, then you don't understand it. Well, he couldn't explain algebra to a 5-year-old, so did he not understand algebra? Well, no, of course he's understood algebra. It's just a 5-year-old can't understand algebra. You also have to understand that. But it also makes it so that you don't get used to a sort of jargon. And because you become familiar with it, that you just repeat it so much that you've kind of gotten like an intuitive feeling for when to say a certain thing, when to say a certain word. Just like, we all have the intuitions of when to use a dollar, like how money works and we have no idea what money actually is. You don't want to do that. So putting things in your own words, actively doing this, trying to explain things to others, for example, in your own words, is good. In that it will also help with the isolation that a jargon would force you into. In that you don't want to be like, you don't want to get deep into this and then find that you're speaking the equivalent of Klingon to the regular person because you've never bothered doing these exercises of translation from the beginning, so that when you have to translate, you can translate and you can communicate with somebody who's not in this milieu, whether they be analytic or continental. You don't want to be talking Hegelese, you don't want to be talking any jargon. You want to be talking as basic a language that is commonly available as possible. And this is actually a result in Hegel's methodology. The methodology itself requires there be a unity of language and meaning, which is very interesting. As far as note-taking goes, my note-taking was write the argument in my own words. And every time that I went back to the argument, do not look at my prior notes. Write a fresh reinterpretation of the argument as I recall, or as I'm rethinking it at the moment. And then you can later compare between what you say in this prior formulation and what you say in this new formulation. Did you find out anything new? Did you forget something? And to me, that's been far more helpful. And because you're doing a more expanded thing than just going here he mentions the treatment of becoming. That's not going to help you. You want to do things that are going to repeat the information as much as possible in as compact a time and space as possible, so that you burn this stuff into your mind. So that at one point, and it doesn't take that long, quite frankly, at one point you start realizing that you are no longer thinking externally about these. You're no longer looking at the world and going, okay, where's the contradiction here? Where's the dialectic? Where's the immediacy? Where's the mediation? Where's the being? Where's the essence? In which you're being conscious about these concepts. You'll just think with these concepts. They will become your mind. They will become your way of thinking, your logic.
That's it for questions on my end. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Sure, yeah. Actually, we skipped, I think, a couple of the questions that were on the list, and I do want to answer those.
Okay.
I think we skipped 4 and 5. So
5 is, has Hegel's philosophy inspired, even if partially, only partially, any projects or future goals?
Yes. Everything you see in my channel that's been, well, obviously that was inspired by Hegel, but that's just kind of like philosophical communication, which had I maybe gone into any other philosopher, I would have done that. So it's just my love of truth that wants me to communicate that kind of stuff. But anything you see like related to aesthetics in my channel, for example, I came to appreciate aesthetics because of Hegel. Art didn't really make any sense to me beyond just like, oh well, it's just whatever people say, and it wasn't really an objective thing. And it wasn't until like I'd been on like the grind for like, what was it, about 2 years, and one day, like somewhere around 2018 or so, maybe 2019, a friend of mine, Tree, he wanted to watch all of Miyazaki's movies because it's a thing that we do amongst friends here. We watch movies together occasionally, and so we just binge watched all of Miyazaki stuff. And after watching like, what was it? We watched Totoro first, I think, and thoughts just streamed into my head, and they would not stop about like looking at the way in which this whole thing came together and like the meaningful things about it. And that was like my first taste of like, this is what art criticism is. So he watched a bunch of all the rest of his movies. You can find the analyses on Left of Wreckage, my blog on cultural stuff. And that's when I became aware, like, oh, this is what this stuff does. And it wasn't the case that, like, at first you begin with like projecting categories. You're like, oh, it's like the kind of thing that you're like, oh, this is like Plato's cave or Heidegger's Dasein or whatnot. And you kind of do these name drops, and you're like, and you use them as frames external to the work, and like they're there, but it's not as unified a presentation as what I would do now. So that certainly was sparked by Hegel, and Hegel actually got me to care about the importance of, say, fashion, for example. I am, by my nature, a very like a pragmatic, functional person. Like stuff in my house does stuff. Otherwise, I don't care. Like I do like beautiful things, but most of the things I have are not for that beauty. And like clothes for me are not a matter of beauty; they're kind of function. But Hegel convinced me otherwise. Hegel convinced me like, no, like art does say something very important. And whether you like it or not, it does say something about you. The way you present yourself externally, the way you appear, the way you enunciate, all these other things. While you may want to be this idealistic weirdo who pretends that you can be like David Chalmers and look like a homeless man while being a world-famous philosopher, lecturing to people and being on TV looking like a slob, like Zizek or something, you ought to have self-respect for yourself. It ought to mean something to you, and that this itself also is seen by other people, and that also matters, and that it also just like once you understand it and like you also get into the mindset, it feels nice, right? So that certainly changed with me as far as that kind of stuff, like other products. So I have another blog for kind of the slight bit of art that I engage with. That's inspired heavily by, Hegelian considerations. You look at them, most of the poems right now, like they're like highly philosophical, metaphysical stuff, Hegelian categories, whatnot. So that's certainly been inspired this whole idea of a podcast. What I'm doing this for example, is the hope is not that you'll be inspired, just go read a guy named Hegel and like just parrot Hegelian ideas, so you can go to a bar, have a couple of drinks, and ruminate about the negative unity of corporeality or like abstract shit like that. Nobody cares about that. The primary goal here is to show you that this stuff goes way, way beyond just ideas in your head. That this philosophy is something living. The classical project of philosophy is you were supposed to become a sage. This is supposed to be a buildup of you. It's not something of like, I just like ideas. I just like perspectives. I hate that. I hate that so much.
Yeah, me as well. You kind of answered this already, but what would you say can be one or some expected significant impacts of Hegel's philosophy on any curious person willing to take the time and put in the effort? Are we going to have a bunch of Übermensch walking around? Or are we going to have a bunch of people not interested in art and then suddenly giving these, you know, art criticism articles? What's going to happen? What should we expect?
Well, I would say that even for people who don't care about like the rest of the system or any of that, and the one thing that you are, if you are sincere about this and actually take the time to do it, never again in your life will you be bamboozled by conceptual bullshit from anybody, be it from philosophers or from scientists. It's already easy enough for people to go like, well, I'm not bamboozled by these stupid like religious stuff. Like these and that claims like from the Bible or the Quran or anything else like that. They go against the science. They don't make any sense. Like how can God be good? And like he damns people to hell, forever in pain. Those kind of things. Okay, we're at a stage in our societies in the West in which like, the common man, the everyday Joe Blow can do that. But they still like buy into bullshit that scientists speak. They still buy into bullshit like materialism. It's hard to believe. I know if you're a materialist, you probably go like, materialism isn't bullshit. Yes, it is. You just need to think about it. You need to think about things objectively, because Hegel's whole issue with the logic is objective thought. Forget the absolute qualification. It takes time to understand that. But you understand the regular person has an intuition of objective thought. So what you want is objective thoughts, true thoughts. This is something Hegel gives you that nobody else really does, explicitly at least, where you can figure out, is this person just talking nonsense? Whether they are being sincere about them believing that they're saying something intelligible or not is irrelevant. Just as like certain people genuinely seem to believe in God, but like the things that they believe about God is nonsense. Likewise, a lot of scientists believe in certain things like materialism or physicalism, or that time is based on entropy. And when you actually analyze this conceptually, it's a whole bunch of nothing. You don't want to be bamboozled by that. A lot of stuff, like I would say that the Large Hadron Collider is based on a wide scale bamboozling of everybody, in which these scientists are they believe they're doing something. I don't think that they're being dishonest or disingenuous and nefariously just pretending to do stuff, but that they themselves have bought into this weird belief of things that don't make any sense. But since it's all become familiar to them and everything's couched in this language of particles and all these other things that they have convinced themselves are there just because everybody talks about them as if they're there. If you do any basic conceptual analysis, you'll find out that the standard particle model is bullshit. You don't even need Hegel for that. You just need to do a negative, deconstruction to show what are these things actually referring to find out that they actually don't refer to anything at all. So on the negative side, Hegel will make you a master negative dialectician. You'll be able to deconstruct bullshit from anybody. And in that way, you can be like the perfect skeptic and win every argument, and nobody will like you, and they'll be annoyed. They won't invite you to the chat rooms anymore. On the other side, you may just become aware, you may be lucky enough, not everybody is lucky enough, unfortunately, that you are not obstinate to try the experiment and accept the results. If you do the experiment, I assure you one of the results that you will get is that you will find out that there are objective absolute concepts which are unavoidable and they're positively proven. So not only can you do a negative deconstruction on anything to reveal it to be bullshit, you will have an image of what true thoughts are, such that if ever you encounter a true thought, you will know it. And I don't know, if this does not entice you, I don't know what could. Who in this world doesn't want to be immune to bullshit? And who in this world doesn't want to have a basis to say, holy shit, I can recognize truth? I may not have all of it, but whenever I encounter a piece, I will know that this is playing at least a very highly probable role in the truth, if it is only a semblance of truth. If you don't already have something else to slot it into and say, oh, this fits right here in the jigsaw puzzle of reality.
And with that, I think if we were to ask every question relating to beginning and beginners, we would be here all day. You can, this is the philosophy of philosophy. Like, this is relating to every question you can possibly have. So I don't think we have enough time to sit here and ask every question possible.
No. But we still have time for number 3. Though we ranged over a lot of that, there's some of that I would still have to add.
Gotcha. So, how has studying Hegel's philosophy impacted your daily life, if at all?
Give me a sec. Alright, sorry about that. Okay, this one, I probably have a unique answer because, I don't think it's impacted, I haven't asked many people this, but my own experience is that I haven't seen other people imply the level of change that I have had, okay? This has impacted me at an extremely core level. I have become more patient because of it. I have become more open because of it. I have become more loving because of it. The connection to aesthetics is much stronger now, and not only in an intellectual sense, I feel it more. I feel the immense sense of the significance of the divine in a lot of things that are utterly mundane, right? Not only do you look at the physical world of nature and see its beauty, both as a sensuous thing as well as rational harmony and structure. You look at people and you see the freedom that is embodied in their very living. Even when people are stupid, right? It's one of the hardest things I think that intellectual people deal with is not falling into a misanthropy. When you deal with regular people, because you live in an intellectually distinct world that's alien to that, and to connect to regular people in that way is just hard. And I used to have that problem, regular people, normies, are stupid and whatnot, and I still don't like talking to them, but I don't mind them, and I appreciate them, and I appreciate that they have a different focus in life that's different from mine, and that for who they are and what they are, that's exactly what they should be doing, and that I have no business trying to go hey, you need to stop doing what you're doing, and you need to try to focus on this philosophy stuff, because otherwise you're wasting your life. The unexamined life is not worth living. Well, that is true. One ought to examine one's life. But even if you don't, and everybody does to some small extent, even if you don't, even if that's not your focus, the things that those people are doing do matter to them. Their life does matter to them. Whether it matters to you externally, it doesn't matter. You're not about to go kill them or annihilate them or anything. Except for collective movements like voting away certain things, your personal opinion doesn't really have much impact on other people's lives in that way, unless you're in a particularly high position of power. For example, I had a workmate at work, typical Mexican, second generation here, but still ultra conservative, very anti-LGBT, and even though he was an atheist, and we can get along. We disagree on many things. We had like a few arguments, like no, just fun arguments. But I could appreciate that he has his perspective. I could understand from his background why he would think that. I offered like my own pushback, but if it didn't win the day, okay, so what? This is not the end of the world. This guy has more important things on his mind. He was always worried about money. Has a family to feed. Which I don't have. So different people have different pressures. They have different goals immediately, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't mind. You're a Mer Spirit Man, right? Yeah. You know about him. One of the things I heavily disagreed with Spirit Man about was that he had this focus of like everybody needs to be doing this thing right now. Everybody needs to read Hegel right now. Because like everything else is a waste of time. This is the most important thing in the world. No, what Hegel taught me is that this whole idea, because before Hegel I was a Marxist, remember, and while I was a Marxist, that was also my view. This is the most important thing in the world. Everybody needs to be studying Marxism right now. We need to learn what the economy actually is and figure out that all this is a scam. It's ultimately broken, it doesn't work, and everybody's going to go to hell if we don't change things. Well, Hegel taught me otherwise. Hegel taught me that everything has its time and its place, just like the Bible says. I forget what it is, the Proverbs, I think. Everything has its season. Everybody has their unique goals because they have immediacies in their life they need to take care of. Some people, the most important thing they could be doing is making artworks. Some people, the most important thing they could be doing is flipping your burger at McDonald's. Some people, the most important thing that they could be doing is reading Hegel, or reading Plato, or reading anybody. Like even if somebody says should I get into philosophy? Well, it depends, right? My advice is, what are you interested in? What questions do you have? Because if I just tell people go read Hegel abstractly, Hegel has all the answers. Maybe they're not interested in Hegel's answers. Maybe because Hegel has to be read in a certain way in which the answers that you want are not the answers that you're going to get at the beginning. So I wouldn't advise most people to either read philosophy or read Hegel, just as I wouldn't tell somebody who's having a tough time in life. It's like, oh, well, you just need to accept Jesus into your heart. What does that mean? What does that do for people? It doesn't really do anything. People accept Jesus into their heart who are already open and on the way to that. Now, maybe you can be part of that, and they're like, okay, what does Jesus guy say? And you can give them some information for them to hook them in, if they want to. But you can't really focus on these things, and they're not the most important things. If I was a dictator all of a sudden, right, and I could just do things at a snap of a finger, I would not make it mandatory anywhere that you should read Hegel. I would not go and change the philosophy department and say, okay, everybody else is outlined, we only read Hegel. Because not everybody's interested in what Hegel's doing, and I don't think everybody has to. I'm totally fine that there exist Deleuze's in this world, or Whiteheads, or Nietzscheans. Different people need a different kind of message. Different people need to be doing different things. That's just a matter of the differentiation of and individualization of life. So that's a huge openness, and I appreciate that. If I meet a genuine Nietzschean, I appreciate that, as opposed to a Sud. I don't appreciate that, but that's a whole other thing. I appreciate people who sit on their ass all day playing video games to entertain other people. Somebody's got to entertain people, right? That's just the way it is. And some people are better entertaining than others. I'm not a very entertaining person in that way, so I'm not doing it. But occasionally I do tune into those streams, and I appreciate that it's there, that they're doing it, and maybe these people are not looking to the deepest things of life, but maybe that's just all that they're there for, and in itself it is a good. Oh, that's another thing, right? The understanding of this stuff led me to the identification of the good in a real objective sense, in which because of that I can see the good that these partial views have. Even something that in many ways you could consider degenerate smut if it is done in a proper way, with passion, with like an actual inspiration of truth behind it, even that can be good. What is it? There's a set of this one poem that Hyperion was telling me. I forget what it's called, but it's about this one guy who's kind of decides to just be as degenerate as possible and like commit himself to evil. And yet it's written in such a truthful manner that anybody who is wise enough doesn't look at this as like, oh, this is glorifying evil or anything. No, it's supposed to show you the consequences of it. Just like you look at a Scorsese movie and like, back when this stuff first came out, I'm sure like many people said like, oh, this stuff is nothing but glorifying degenerate violence and it's a bad influence on society. Yes, there are stupid people who will look at that and think that it's glorifying the mobster lifestyle. But anybody who has an eye for truth will look at that and go like, no, like this shows you exactly like how this lifestyle appears to these people, and it shows you the ultimate consequence of like where this all ends up. Anybody wise will look at that and go like, yeah, that was a perfectly good depiction of this kind of degenerate lifestyle and like what it really leads to. And is there a place for that in reality? Absolutely. It changed me on the level of religion. Before Hegel, I was an atheistic pantheist, at best. Pantheism, you can consider it God, but, since it's not a person, there's no reason to really call it God. So I consider myself an atheist up until I got into like Hegel's concept of God and started to understand that, and it still took a while. It wasn't until like about 6 years ago now or something that I finally became like convinced of the personality of God, but I still didn't make the full step that I really like intuitively buy that, even though logically it made sense. And nowadays, I consider myself a Christian. For those of you who don't know, and what Hegel says about that's true. I agree with as well. I believe in the whole historical thing of it. I think there was a guy named Jesus. I think he was crucified. I do believe that he resurrected, did all the miracles, and I think he fits the bill for the Son of God. I have no reason to believe that people were lying and making shit up 2,000 years ago just to go be killed in the Roman Colosseums, for not willing to say that they were making it up. Now that itself also increases my love for the world, quite frankly, because believe it or not, yes, I know that like the story we get of Christianity from like this standard way that we encounter it growing up, in a non-intellectual background in churches, is pretty stupid. And so I used to think that's why I became explicitly an atheist. Like Christianity made no sense. It seemed pretty stupid and pretty evil as far as the history of the church, the Catholics go anyway. And going back to it now with the understanding of philosophy that Hegel has, particularly orthodox Christology and metaphysics, one, it's like amazingly like coherent and true, and second, it's beautiful, and it really gives a whole new view to the world that gives it a completely higher level of meaning than it had before. Veganism, I think I have an article, the magnanimity of spirit. There's also the video on my channel about it. I think veganism is ultimately true for Hegelian reasons, which are not what most people would expect. Hegel doesn't talk about veganism, but given like his commitments and particularly with recognition, like the understanding of recognition just leads to so much. It leads to that expansion of love for everything. Like you can even love the rocks and the crystals in the earth. They're beautiful. Like they have a truth to them. They have a place in creation. We couldn't do without them. Likewise with animals. I think that veganism is ultimately a result out of the personal and in the future, I think, collective raising awareness of human beings to the point in which we love animals so much that we don't want to eat them. It's not a matter of like, oh, well, we don't want to, it's because of pain abstractly or anything and suffering reduction. No, it's, we love them. I would be totally fine stopping eating meat, but it's delicious. But if I had to, I would have no problem. I do love animals, but it is part of their own existence and nature at the current time that they are eaten by other animals and that we are animals who eat them. I'm just against the cruelty of it all in factory farms and whatnot. And ultimately, the pursuit of absolute knowledge entails all these things. The pursuit of ultimate knowledge roots the capacity to genuinely love everything and everyone, genuinely forgive, to really understand why people are the way they are, to genuinely hope in the future that everything will be fine, no matter how bad things seem, to genuinely trust that there is ultimate justice in this world, that everybody gets their due. You may believe that in various ways, but I do believe that it happens. I have a certainty, not just a belief, I have a certainty that it does happen. And ultimately, I mean, this solves the existential dread that we live in today as humans. That, having lost the foundation of religion and having lost the foundation of dogmatic philosophy, everything has become this free-floating, relative, amorphous mass where we can do more than we ever could before, and yet, since nobody sees the point, because there is no final grounding point, nothing gives an ultimate significance to you. It ends in nihilism. But with Hegel, you get that ultimate grounding. You know that it's there for sure. It's not just a belief. It's not just a matter of, well, I got to take a leap of faith. No. You can know for sure that it's there. And the certainty of this knowledge, I mean, who can take that away from you? Ultimately, the reason, why could the early Christians or anybody who's ever martyred, why can they go to their deaths so valiantly, unwilling to maintain their physical life because they value the truth so much that they would not go against it? Because it is the very foundation of our being. Ultimately, the truth prevails and falsehood does not. So, I would say truth, beauty, goodness, God, and the ultimate meaningfulness of not just my life or your life, but the ultimate meaning of everything is grounded in this one philosophy in which you don't even have to read everything, by the way. You can become very certain about some things very quickly with a very little amount, but you will have to sit on it for a few years and ruminate on it and slowly let it seep into your consciousness, but it will produce these effects in you if you let it. The truth will change you if you are true to it.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you for sharing your time and your thoughts. Are there any final words, maybe for your past self, maybe for your fellow readers, or maybe those who are still undecided on whether or not it's worth it to begin?
Well, don't be afraid. You hear that this stuff is the hardest stuff in all of philosophy. It's true and it's not. It's true if you aren't willing to let go of all your preconceptions and you just keep fighting the text. It's not if you are willing to do that and just go along with it. If what I said does not convince you, I don't know, to give it a try. I don't know what it is that you're looking for in philosophy, because it cannot be anything worthwhile, in my opinion, if you're not looking for the absolute truth and the ultimate answers to everything. And if you're going to go ahead and say well, you convinced me, AW, I'm going to give it a go. Remember, there are resources, both by myself and by other people, and there is the Discord that I run. Yeah, you're most definitely welcome and invited. It will be in the... I will post it in the description of the video. So if you have any questions, if you want help, there are probably a dozen people now on my server that will happily answer questions for beginners. Even though, you know, we have the beam nothing becoming discussion and the presupposition discussion, like God knows for what the nth time it is. We get tired of it, but you know what? We'll still answer you. We'll still go ahead and tell you. So don't be afraid to reach out and join the Imperial Trail Discord server and ask us questions. We want other people to gain the same grounding that we have. I mean, it's a hell of a thing not to feel bamboozled by other false things, and also to know for sure that you have a grounding and that you no longer have to be looking aimlessly amongst a sea of people saying, look here, look there, and you going like, well, you know, I only have so much time. Everybody says that they're right, but who's right? Well, with this, believe it or not, and if you don't believe it, try it. You can get the answers, and you can know what is and what ultimately isn't true. And with that, we'll leave it off. Thank you for doing the honors of interviewing me, Iapetus. We'll hopefully get quite a few more.
No problem at all.